Hi class, this is chapter 9, sexual assault. This week, the book even warns you that the statistics that are used in the book are prone to being incorrect just because of the nature of reporting sexual assault. So just take everything with a grain of salt. Some of you are victims of sexual assault. As we go through this week, just take care of yourself and make sure that you are taking breaks if you need to take breaks. What we're trying to do is be objective as we learn to become helpers. So I hope this week you're able to step back from any personal experiences that you might have and really look at the bigger picture of sexual assault in our culture. There are even how we define rape is controversial. And there's a couple different definitions that they give in your book on page 249. The definition that they use in the textbook is an unwanted act of oral, vaginal, or anal penetration committed through, not though, the use of force, a threat of force, or when incapacitated. There was a benchmark study. The National Violence Against Women survey took place in 1998, and what they found is that 1 in 6 women, or 17% of the respondents, and 1 in 33, or 3% of men, have experienced an attempt or completed rape in their lifetime. This can include forced vaginal, oral, or anal sex, and the statistics are probably very conservative. Other studies have ranged from 10 to 15% of American men and 15 to 33% of American women. So it's no shock that rape is underreported crime. 3 out of 5 sexual assault victims state that the offender was an intimate relative or friend or acquaintance, which is what leads to the underreporting. There's also a lot of coercion. There's a lot of there's a lot of grooming that takes place that tells victims to keep quiet. A lot of guilt and shame. Sexual abuse of children under 12 is rarely reported. And it talks about how there's lots of children that come into child protection centers, and that the literature consistently estimates that 50 to 90% of all rapes or attempted rapes go unreported. So you can only imagine how many people are actually impacted by rape or sexual assault. The unique situation of sexual abuse and rape survivors is that a crisis resulting from sexual abuse and rape is different in nature, intensity, and extent from other forms of crisis. So just like when we talked about PTSD, sexual assault survivors and rape survivors often have a higher level of PTSD as a result of what has happened to them. There are many different social and cultural factors that take place. 4 different factors that the book talks about on page 250. Gender inequality refers to economic, political, and the legal status of women in comparison to men. Pornography, which has grown in popularity in our culture, reduces women to sexual objects, promotes male dominance, think about 50 Shades of Grey, and encourages or condones sexual violence against women. The message, "she likes it rough," would be an example of that. Social disorganization erodes social controls and constraints and undermines the freedom of individual behavior and sexual determination. And the legitimization of violence. It's this idea that the culture is prone to violence. We see it portrayed in the mass media, we see it in the news. There are laws that permit corporal punishment in schools, violence in sports, military exploits, and video games. So we all become sort of desensitized to the nature of violence in our culture. Historically, the crime of rape has been seen as a crime against a woman's father or her husband, and psychosocial means by which the victors in war reward themselves and humiliate their opponents. In another class, Family Violence, if some of you have taken it, I show a video called War in the Congo, and we look at how rape is used as a tool, an instrument of humiliation and annihilation in that particular warfare. Feminists have shaped the definition of rape. They have focused in on it being an exercise in power and control, rather than being predominantly about sex. You'll see the personal and psychological factors of rapists listed up above if you want to look at those in more detail, or on page 250. And then there's 4 categories of rapists. This slide cuts it off. Anger, power exploitative, power reassurance, and sadistic. That's also on page 250. And you can look at the different factors that kind of go along with that. There are a lot of myths about rape. Some people believe that rape is just rough sex. Equating rape and sex is perhaps the most destructive myth of all. It's not about sex. Women cry rape to get revenge. People who, they don't want to believe that rape really occurs. They don't want to believe it happens in their neighborhood. How could this happen? Serves to focus the blame for sexual violence on the victims rather than the perpetrators. You see this all the time in cases where the perpetrator is popular or well liked or powerful. It's easier to believe than knowing that rape can happen to anyone. Rape is motivated by lust. It's really not about lust. And then rapists are psychotic or weird, or survivors of rape provoke the rape somehow. Perhaps they wore the wrong thing, or they were at the wrong party, or they drank too much. And then only bad women are raped. Again, none of this could be farther from the truth. Those are just stereotypes that are commonly held. You know, just even thinking that only women can be victims of rape is another myth. So there are some more myths here that are prevalent about males and sexual assault. Men and boys can't be victims. So it's this idea that, you know, men should be able to fight off attackers. That homosexuals are usually the perpetrators of sexual abuse of boys. Boys are less traumatized than girls. Boys abused by males will later become homosexuals. These are all myths. Let's see what else. If a boy experiences sexual arousal or orgasm from abuse, this means he enjoys it. That is not true. Our bodies are hardwired for physical stimulation that happens during sex, and that does not mean that the child wanted the experience. If a perpetrator is female, the boy just got lucky. We saw this a lot when like the teacher trials were going on, where teachers were involved with middle school boys particularly, or high school boys, that it was love and that those boys were lucky. Again, all myths. According to a 2003 U.S. Department of Justice report, rape is the most common violent crime at universities in the United States. The incidence of rape is 35 per 1,000 female college students per year. However, fewer than 5% of these rapes are reported to the police. So when we look at date and acquaintance rape statistics, they often come from college women being surveyed. You know, a lot of people think date rape isn't really rape because if you've gone out on a date with somebody or you know them, then you must have done something to send the wrong message. So all of that is incorrect. So what are some of the intervention strategies for rape in the immediate aftermath? Right after somebody has been raped, empathy is clearly a very important skill. Letting somebody just express their feelings about what's gone on, building a working alliance, telling them that you're going to be with them throughout the process to help them with recovery, using social support systems, people that they're already close to that would help them, that they could talk to, stopping secondary victimization, which means talking to all the different professionals about what has happened and retelling their story over and over again, which can continue the trauma. Some of the responses that are common, and this list is definitely not, you know, all-inclusive, is that a victim may exhibit no emotion. They could feel humiliated. They can suffer immediate or long-term trauma. They can blame themselves, and they can be reluctant to go to the police. So it's really important for after the first 3 months following the rape that we keep really close tabs on the victims. They're at a high risk for PTSD, depression, suicide, panic attacks, anxiety disorders, social adjustment disorders, sexual dysfunction, eating disorders, dissociation, and a more negative worldview or cognitive distortions. It's really important that the crisis worker not let the client regress or retreat into the past. Blaming external factors, self-blaming, perseverating on why the rape happened are all not helpful, along with the guilt of what-ifing oneself to death about what kind of clothes they wore, not paying attention to surroundings, and so on and so forth. So continuous, proactive follow-up is really important. These are the critical needs and the critical supports that I'll let you review. Adult survivors of childhood abuse, there's just a growing body of evidence that shows that this wreaks lasting damage in their lives and continuing into adulthood. Even if survivors are left untreated, they can experience recurring episodes of re-victimization and exhibit debilitating symptoms for many years. So there's a whole list that you have there of different higher incidences in victims. And then there's this whole idea of re-victimization. So many of those symptoms appear to be even more profound and multiple if women suffered both sexual and physical assault in childhood. Early assault is additive, and it appears that the higher the incident rate, the more profound it is, the higher the potential for later problems. If the abuse occurs in adolescence, the potential for adult sexual assault also increases. Further, if both sexual and physical abuse occur in childhood and adolescence, the chance for re-victimization again increases. So survivors of child sexual abuse do not usually experience repetition of their victimization on a conscious level. That is, they don't intentionally precipitate abuse. It may be that the re-victimization or repetition of the sexual abuse occurs or tends to recur through the survivor's reenactment of the physical, sexual, and emotional abuse that was experienced. Just like the female counterparts, males who were sexually assaulted in childhood are often also more likely to be assaulted as adults. False memories. False Memory Syndrome Foundation was created. This is a very controversial subject. You might want to explore it for your paper. A lot of people usually choose this one for the current controversies. Oh, sorry, that's a different class. Scratch that. The false memory idea is very controversial, and 262 and 263 have the discussion of that. I would say on this slide, the most important thing to look at is the idea of grounding, or having the client focus on the therapist in the here and now, and asking the client to describe currently their internal experiences as they talk about it, helping them orient to their current environment and using relaxation techniques to help them. Also validating that the trauma did occur, and even if it is denied by the family, it doesn't mean it wasn't real. To be an advocate for the client and reinforce the resourcefulness of the client, and be a role model to help the client with childhood developmental tasks that might have been missed. In our video on PTSD with veterans, we saw this idea of prolonged exposure or cognitive restructuring therapy. So we saw a version of that with the veterans. It's also used with adult survivors. This idea of support groups for survivors, grief resolution, and helping them to break that conditioned response as a result of the absence of the reinforcement. Phases of child sexual abuse are very important to know about. I'm going to let you go ahead and read through those. I don't need to read them to you, but they're very important because it's important to understand the behavior that the abuser kind of sets up to get the child to the point of, cooperating. Something that's not on these slides but is on page 273 are the dynamics of sexual abuse in families. The incestuous family can operate much like an alcoholic or battered family does in developing a series of messages or rules that pivot around denial, duplicity, deceit, role confusion, violence, and social isolation. The children receive messages such as don't show feelings, especially anger, be in control at all times, don't ask for help, deny what is happening, and do not believe your own sense or perception. No one is trustworthy. Keep the secret because no one will believe you anyway, and be ashamed of yourself because you're to blame for everything. So those are really important dynamics that you can see would set up bad things to happen later on in a child's life if they believe those messages. So some of the interventions with children are listed on this slide. The most important thing we want to do is try to help kids that have been sexually abused develop healthy boundaries and understand that they have this need for regaining a sense of control in their life. They need to be feeling affirmed and safe. They need education around shame. That's the predominant feature for the child's response to abuse is shame. They need to know that it's the adult and not the child who made the mistake. So children who have been physically injured need to have these injuries explained to them and be told that their bodies will be okay. Many children believe that others will be able to tell what's happened to them by looking at them. So children need to know that although they may feel different, sexual abuse does not make them look different. So it's really important to understand what developmental stage that the child is in, so that you know what kind of education and therapy to deliver to them. And then assertiveness training, really helping them be able to protect their own body and say no. It's important to counsel the parents and prevent re-victimization, and individual counseling is really good about all of these things as well.